You're listening to Feathers, a podcast of stories of women walking in faith. I hope these stories inspire you and encourage you to take flight in your own faith. I'm your host, Amy Bennett, and this is Season 7, Episode 3. Feathers is an outreach of Abiding Ministries. Find more encouragement at abidingministries.net. Well, hey, friend, thanks so much for joining me here this week. It is such a pleasure to do this podcast. I don't know if I say that quite enough. And so I'm so excited to be back for another week. We've had a wonderful kickoff to Season 7. I can't believe we're already on Episode 3. And this week's guest is Shannon Popkin. Shannon is a married mom of 3 teens from Michigan, and Shannon just released her first book called Control Girl: Lessons on Surrendering Your Burden of Control from 7 Women in the Bible. And the book itself is set up like a Bible study where there are 4 or 5 lessons on each of the 7 women of the Bible. And it's not the traditional format of what we normally hear on Feathers. But after reading the book, I felt like the topic was so important to talk about when we're thinking about faith and obedience. You know, when a woman has issues with control, and let's face it, a lot of us do, including me, sometimes it makes it really hard to be obedient, not just in the big things God is calling us to, but also in the little ways we love the people around us. And so I'm excited for you guys to hear this conversation with Shannon and see if it might tap into something that you might be struggling with, and it might help you in your journey of obedience. So let's go ahead and get to my conversation with Shannon. Well, hey, Shannon, and welcome to Feathers today.
Thank you, Amy. It's great to be with you.
Yes, I would love for you to introduce yourself, your family, and what keeps you busy these days.
Absolutely. Well, I am married to Ken. We have been married for 21 years, and we have the joy of parenting 3 teenagers at the moment. So they are 19, 17, and 14. We just had birthdays, so I got to get used to those new ages. So our 19-year-old is a sophomore at Liberty University in Virginia. And then we have a senior in high school this year and an 8th grader. So my fall is going to be super busy with soccer and football. And then, of course, all the other things that we're doing. We have church involvements and small groups that we're in. And I am doing a lot of speaking and writing these days. So I'm enjoying all of the things that God has allowed.
Oh, my goodness. Okay. So I have friends that live in Virginia. They all went to in Lynchburg.
Really?
So they went to the law school. They're both lawyers. They went to Liberty. I have another cousin who is a nurse that went to school there. And so I get to see Liberty in my Facebook news to say that.
Yeah.
And we do go visit them. We try to go visit them. We actually have family in Maryland, so we drive up north and we try to stop them in Lynchburg. And see them every once in a while.
So are you amazed every time you drive on campus at the big, new, beautiful building? Every single time you go?
I don't think that I've even been actually on campus as many times this year. I just see, we see, I guess, the dorms up on the hill, and then we see the skiing.
Yes.
I don't know. Skiing can happen all year round. I don't know. Is that true?
Yeah, we tried it. It's up on the side of the mountain where the logo is on Liberty Mountain. And then they have this white kind of like carpet, but it mists. And so you can ski down it. So it's like moist. And it's quite an experience. You go very fast, but it was fun.
Oh my goodness. Okay, so I've actually never skied before. Can you believe that?
Well, you could ski in shorts up there if you wanted.
Yeah. Oh, I'm just picturing that could be a disaster. Goodness. Oh. Okay, so you have one out of the nest.
Yeah.
And you said he's a sophomore this
year? Yes, a daughter, and she is a sophomore. Yep.
Oh, you have a daughter. The eldest is a daughter. Yep. So how was it? You survived the first year.
Yes. Oh, it's a challenge, right? Just surrendering that burden of control, especially when they're so far away. She's 12 hours away from me. And so, but she had a fabulous first year, and I just got to drive her down this year. And we just talked about how God has been teaching her and challenging her, and just, I can just see his fingers and in all of the tiny details of her life. And so how could we not? How could we want anything more for our kids, right? than for them to venture out and experience God.
Okay. So I have just a couple more years. I'm a freshman in high school this year. So I'm in the official, oh my gosh, only now 3 more first days of school in my home.
Yeah.
And starting to count only 4 more summer vacations with Emma at home.
Yeah.
And, just doing that.
Yeah, we tried to squeeze in some big vacations because we were not really a big vacation family. And so we wanted to do a couple of big trips. So we, every summer leading up to senior year, we were like, okay, can we afford to do another one? Because you feel like it's almost like they're going to jump off a cliff and you're not going to see them again. And it's not true. It's not true. She still wants to go on vacation with us if we go. So.
That's true. This summer we went on vacation and my parents went with us. So it's like, I've been graduated for, 20 years and I'm still going on vacation.
Exactly. Yeah. You'll always be a part of her life. So, but yeah, the transitions, they're a challenge. And I think every transition, it's interesting. When she goes away, it's a transition. And then when she comes back, it's a transition. We all have to kind of shift a little bit. But that's just going to be part of life from here on out, I think. When they're little, it feels like it's going to last forever. But when time speeds up when they get to be teenagers.
Yes, it absolutely is. Everything gets crazy and it's going fast. I can't even believe. So it's already school already. Oh, my goodness.
Yeah.
Going too fast.
Yep. Here we go.
Yep, exactly. So today I want us to talk about your book. It's called Control Girl. So we're going to talk a lot about control today. I related so much to so many aspects of it, and really was eye-opening for a lot of reasons. That maybe I have more control issues than I thought.
Amy, you're not alone in that. I just met with a Bible study group yesterday who went through the book, and all of them were saying, I didn't, when this book was suggested, I kind of chuckled and said, well, maybe I'll learn how to help other people. and they didn't really, in their heart of hearts think that they were going to learn a lot from it. But each one of them felt like at least one of the chapters in the book really spoke to them and was helpful in helping them just kind of lay open their own control issues. And I certainly didn't think of myself as controlling as a younger woman. I thought that was the furthest thing from me, but I've come to see a little bit more in myself too.
Well, what I loved is that you really talked about control from many different angles, and I do want to touch on several of those today. I want to start where the part that really got to me is, and maybe I think this is where maybe some of yours, you'll have to just correct me if I'm wrong, but maybe some of yours talk about that control actually manifests itself a lot of times as anger and anxiety.
Yeah.
And so for me, I don't know, you talk about how you thought you kind of had an anger, really kept trying to attack it from that, but actually that there was a sin beneath the sin. And so talk about how things are related, anger, anxiety, and control, and where you kind of saw that maybe.
Yeah, I was really struggling with anger. And for years, I was asking friends to hold me accountable, and I was reading books about anger and making little journals and just praying, asking God to change me in this area. And then one day I was driving in the car and I heard Dee Breston on the radio, and she was talking about how there are these surface level sins that are often fed by a deeper underlying sin. And she mentioned the sin of control. And that just intuitively snapped into place for me. I just thought, that is my problem. For me, anger was rising to the surface, but control was what was feeding it. And so I just started kind of trying that out. Whenever I would get angry, whenever I would feel the anger bubbling to the surface, I would start asking myself, okay, Shannon, what are you trying to control here? What is it, or what do you feel like you're losing control of? What is feeding this anger? And more often than not, I was trying to control something. And so when I started linking those two together, because you can't deal with the anger, it's the byproduct of that desire for control until you get down below the surface and deal with that thing that you're trying to control and release that first to God. And then I was able to start getting some traction with my anger. And then I have other friends who don't struggle with anger. And I'm always like, man, I don't understand you. I wish I could be like you. But they don't struggle with anger. However, what often they tell me is they struggle a lot with anxiety and fear. And that just has this deep rooted, effect in their life. And I struggle also with anxiety and fear, but it doesn't grip me the same way anger does. And so, but for them, I've interviewed a whole bunch of different women who struggle with with anxiety. And they also can see a correlation with this desire to be in control. Their minds are spinning out of control when the teenager doesn't call, and they're 10 minutes late, and they're projecting forward to, oh no, his car is on the side of the road, or he's in a ditch and he's unconscious. And, they just, like, the anxiety just takes over because it's something that they cannot control, or it's out of their control. And so first, they have to deal with the fact that I can't control what happens to everyone that I love, and so that's at the core, that's at the root. And when we can first, just really dig into that problem and that struggle, I think it helps us then to deal with those byproducts of anger, anxiety, fear, perfectionism. Just so many of those negative emotions that we experience are rooted in control.
And I want to talk a little bit more about that, but I want to dig into this anger thing, because this is what the story that struck a chord with me, and it might strike a chord with some people listening, is the story that you tell about that on the floor in the bathroom.
Yeah.
Would you tell that story?
So I had a middle schooler at the time, and we had moved him into a new bedroom. And so he was now going to be using the bathroom that was the guest bathroom. So, when he was up, tucked away where nobody ever used his bathroom, I was like, oh, I'm not so worried about it. But now it was like, I didn't want to constantly be embarrassed, by how he was keeping the bathroom. So I did this big orientation to his bathroom, and we did run-throughs. I thought I was being so helpful here. And so, I was just trying to prevent, tension. And so, I said, I did a walkthrough, after you shower, here's where you hang your towel, and here's where you put your clothes and whatever. And he was he wasn't rolling his eyes, but he was enduring it. And so I thought, okay, good. I've prepared him well. This is not going to be a problem. And then that evening, after he was in bed, I walked in that bathroom, and there on the floor is this stinky pile of soccer clothes. And, the thoughts that went through my mind were oh no, you have got to take control of this. He is not listening to instructions. What sort of, adult is he going to be? What sort of husband is he going to be? What sort of employee? That's what our minds do. They project forward. And so,
yes, the projection is what gets me. It's if we can't handle these, and then it mushrooms in your brain. It's kind of like with the thing with being anxious about the accident. You're mushrooming it to, oh, it's got to be the worst. The little things, you're oh my gosh, they're going to be the worst parent and husband and person of society ever.
And we think unless I manage all of these contingencies along the way, my happy ending that I'm reaching for, it's fading in the distance. I have to produce that happy ending. And so I have to manage the towels on the floor, right? And so in my mind, it felt like the right thing to do would be to take control, to be powerful, to rise up and be the ruler of this towel on the floor. And so I started yelling his name and over, and he was asleep. I mean, it was late, and he comes up, and I just shredded his dignity, pointing at that pile on the floor and just saying, I told you, I taught you how to do this, and you defy me with this towel. And in the middle of it, I felt maybe this twinge of, I'm going to regret this. But I pushed that away because there's just this compelling reason in my mind, that it is good and right for me to take control. I have to take control. I'm invested in this. And if I don't take control, well, then what? And so, I just lost it with my anger, with my temper. And he, picked up the laundry, went back to bed, and about 20 minutes later, I was just overwhelmed with grief and regret and sorrow that this thing that I have struggled with repeatedly, here it was again. Here I had done it again and just felt so much shame. And I did go back and apologize to him, just weeping at his bedside, saying, will you please forgive me? I am so sorry I treated you that way. I shouldn't have woken him up. I should have waited, until there was an appropriate time. Not that I should have just dismissed it, but I need to be patient with my kids. They're not adults yet. And trying to control them and turn them into little adults prematurely like that, I can't. It's not in my control. And so to try and control the things I can't control, it just turns me into a person that I don't want to become. And so I think that was one of the many, many experiences of just grief and sorrow over who I was becoming that led me to think a little more deeply about this struggle with control and where I was headed in life.
Well, I just so relate to that. I think today, I just took down a sign in our bathroom that said, stay in the bathroom while you're brushing your teeth.
we need those reminders, don't we?
Oh my goodness. I just get so tired of repeating myself. And so I'm in the thick of it, and I know you have kids at home too. And so I want to just be honest. I got to the end of the chapter and I was like, but what do you do about the towels?
Yeah. Yep. Well,
yeah. So two questions. One, you talk about hold and fold as a response to this kind of sin of control. So talk about what that looks like.
Sure. Yeah. And, we framed this whole question with parenting. And so especially in parenting, this hold and fold principle is really helpful. I'm borrowing it from a book by another author called Losing Control and Liking It. Tim Sanford is the author. And so he says, there are things in life we can control and there are things in life we cannot control. And if we draw a big, thick line down the middle, on one side of life, the things that we can control, really what fits in that category is ourselves. And everything else has to slide over on the other side of that line. And so he suggests a response of hold and fold. And so with myself, with the things that I can control, I need to hold responsibility for myself. I need to be a responsible parent. And then with everything else, I'm called to fold my hands and surrender before God. And so in parenting, think of it like when you get that newborn little baby, you're 100% holding. They have no control over anything. And so you are completely in control and you need to be a responsible parent. It's a good mom who chooses correct clothing and food and environment and safety and all those things. But by the time your child is an adult, it's not a good thing if you're choosing his food and his environment and his clothing and safety. And so at some point, we have to graduate from holding responsibility as a parent to folding our hands in surrender. And I just suggest it's a gradual process. You know what the end result is. We've all seen mothers of adult children who are trying to control them, who have their hands gripping onto the steering wheel of that child's life. And we know that's wrong. And then we've all seen irresponsible mothers of newborns. And so we know that's wrong. But then what about in between? What about when they're 7 and 8 and 9? And so I like to kind of say, if your child is young enough to still climb in your lap and you're still holding that child on your lap, well, then you're mostly holding. But if your child is either too big to fit in your lap or they're just the kind of kid, their personality, they don't want to sit in your lap, even at age 4 or 5, they want to be independent. Well, you're mostly going to be working on folding and preparing them, helping them to be responsible and make good choices. And so, maybe you let your 6 or your 7-year-old choose their clothes for school, or you let them make some, move within appropriate boundary lines, but surrendering, and they don't have to, they're not going to be exactly what you want them to be, because you are not their creator. God is their creator, and he designed them to be probably not exactly the way that you're hoping that they would be. And so I think there's just so much surrender in parenting. And I am so thankful that God gave me these 3 kids, because I think if I didn't have my children pressing me to work on surrender, I think I would really be a controlling person. So I'm really thankful for the opportunity to work on it.
That's so true. Our kids do make us better people. So not do we see this in parenting, but we also see this in marriage. So how can someone recognize maybe if they're seeing this type of problem in marriage? What does that look like for you?
Yeah, early on in our marriage, I was trying to manage a lot of the minute little details, especially as we parented together, because I was the primary parent when they were little. Most moms are. And he would come in after work and he was doing it all wrong. He was giving the toddler the pink cup instead of the blue cup or whatever. He was cutting their sandwiches wrong. And so I was like overbearing, like not letting him do it the way he wanted to do it. One time I came home from a women's event at church, and he was asleep on the couch, and both of the kids were up in their beds crying, screaming. They were about age 2.5 and 6 months at that point. And I ran up to their bedrooms. It was very disturbing for me to walk in on this. And they're both just like, wah, wah, and so I got them all settled down, gave them their stuffed animals, patted their back, and got them back to sleep. And nothing really was wrong with them. But I went back downstairs and I said, honey, the kids were both crying. And he said, oh, he's kind of groggy, and said, is everything okay? And I'm like, yeah, but they were crying and you were asleep. I mean, he was always asleep when they were crying. Why would I expect it to be different? But he was like, oh, well, okay, if they're okay, I think I'm going to just go to bed. For him, it was a non-event. But for me, it was like this, just this painful recognition, like, I don't know if I can trust him. And so, I feel like, can I even leave him alone with them? What's going to happen if I'm not here? Will I be able to manage all of the contingencies that are they going to be safe? And I was making some ridiculous, conclusions, drawings, and everything was fine. Nobody, was hurt or anything. But those sorts of little instances, they caused me to, rather than surrender. I mean, every mom has to deal with the fact that not every contingency is going to be under her control. I mean, she can buckle them in, she can give them their vaccinations, she can do whatever, everything right. And yet that child's life is not ultimately in her hands. That child is in God's hands. And so, but back to marriage, I mean, I was really being disrespectful to my husband by over managing and by not ever inviting him to even really participate. I was trying to do it all, and because I felt like I couldn't trust him, and I was getting really cranky. I felt like overwhelmed. I was burdened with just the stress of trying to manage it all, all the time and effort it takes to care for little children, and it was like seeping into all of our areas of life. I was telling him, like, oh, look at you, put the sheets on wrong again. And oh my goodness, you left crumbs on the counter and you still didn't change that light bulb. I'm like, you're not helping me with anything. And I just had all of these little threads of disrespect in the way that I was treating him. And as we know, men, they love to be respected. They crave that respect. And by controlling your husband, that is the opposite of respecting him. You cannot control him and respect him at the same time. And so by trying to take control constantly and nag him and undermine his authority and correct him constantly, I really was sending messages of disrespect. And when a man feels disrespected, usually he'll either withdraw or respond with anger. And my husband did both of those. Many times he did just withdraw, retreat. And other times, he would lash out. It was hard to be disrespected. And so there was all this tension in our marriage, and I didn't know what the problem was. I felt like I'm doing it all and you're just getting mad because I'm showing you what you're not doing right. And so I really did not see how disrespectful I was being. But yeah, I would say that tension, if for a woman who wonders, like, am I a controlling wife? Your husband might not label it that way. He might talk more about disrespect, but those two, I think, can be paired up sometimes. But if there's tension, if he's withdrawing, if he's constantly angry, if he's pulling away from the family, sometimes control is the cause of some of that. And so look for those as signs of being an over-controlling wife.
That's so good. I know many people are going to relate to that. It might be some light bulb right now. So I have to ask, when you maybe think, yes, that sounds like that could be me, how do you begin to work through that, especially?
Well, I think it's a process. Recognizing the problem is the first step, right? And first, can I tell like a little story about my marriage? Would that be okay? And then I'll just kind of I'll kind of use that to lay the groundwork. So we had a little kitchen, what I considered a smaller kitchen in our home when our kids were younger. And I had this idea of building an addition onto our home. It was just like this light bulb moment, like that would solve all of my problems. That would be my dream home if I could have this house with an addition on the back. And so I kept like bringing this up with my husband, and he was just kind of like, oh, maybe, let's think about it. And so then I started drawing diagrams, and then I would talk about it and draw more diagrams, and my diagrams were getting more elaborate. I was adding the cabinets and the windows. And so the more I talked about it, the more quiet he was becoming. And finally he just said, okay, Shannon, I think that we could start saving for this. If this is really what you need to be happy, because the kitchen is my he doesn't do any of the cooking. He doesn't, when we're entertaining, that's kind of more my thing. And he, enjoys it when it's there, but he doesn't do any of the preparation for that. And so he was like, okay, I'm happy to help with that, but it's definitely something that we will start saving for. It's not something that we're going to be ready to do for quite a while. And so I was like, okay, I have to be content with that. And then as we started saving money for this addition, I think about 3 different years went by, and we had set aside, just different extra money that we could put toward it. But I'm looking at that and thinking, okay, this is going to take years and years to save this amount. Like, this is taking too long. The kids are going to be grown, and this addition, we're going to be empty nesters putting an addition on the back of our house. What good is that? And so, I just was looking for this acceleration plan. And I was even praying, like, Lord, help there be a way, for this addition to take place. Well, in a series of just a couple of weeks, we got 3 really big, unexpected gifts of money. Or we got one of them was a gift. One was, I think, an inheritance check. And then one was a tax return. And none of those we were expecting. And so if you added those all up, it made the difference for this addition that we were saving for. And I was elated. I thought, God has provided. Like, who can argue with God's provision on this? It is his will for us to do this addition. And so my husband said, hey, let's go out for dinner and talk about this. Talk about this money, because we often will talk through, like, how do we want to use extra money that God has provided. And so I was thinking in my head, like, he's going to tell me, like, he wants to take me out for dinner to surprise me. You know, I'm pretty good at math. I know this all adds up. And so I'm just expecting, you know, I almost called the builder before we went out for dinner, but I thought, well, I'll just wait until it's finalized after this dinner. And over dinner, I mean, he's got this big grin on his face, and he slides this spreadsheet over in front of me. And I'm like, oh, you know, what's this? This is interesting. And so on the spreadsheet are listed out all of these missions organizations and different nonprofit ministries. And there's like dollar amounts next to each one. And I'm looking at that like, okay, with this sinking feeling like, oh no, what is he thinking here? And you have to understand, my husband has the gift of giving. He loves to be generous. He loves when we have opportunity to give. That's a delight for him. And he likes to save so that we can give, which is like not my gift. And so
not my gift.
So anyway, I'm like scanning this document, and down at the bottom is this little line for the addition, and it's a small amount. It's like the same amount as last year. And I was instantly furious. And I just like leaned forward in that booth, like pointing my finger. And I said, do you know that it is not wrong for us to spend our own money? You know, and just like angry. And he was shocked. He said, Shannon, I thought we said, you know, we were saving for this addition. I thought that was understood between us. Like, what is all this anger? And you know, we went home that night, and I was just cold and withdrawn and slamming doors. And he was so hurt and disappointed. And for about 3 days, we didn't talk about it. And I was just angry and withdrawn. But I sensed the Lord just confronting me with how much I wanted control and how little I was respecting our husband and inviting him to lead our family. Like, I had these dreams for our family that I was trying to push the agenda, and I wanted them to be his dreams for our family, my husband's dreams, you know, and I wanted them to be God's dreams also. Like, a bigger kitchen. That was what I wanted for our life. And my husband had other dreams for our family, and God has equipped him to lead our family. And in the story of both Eve and Sarah, God confronts the husband saying, you listened to the voice of your wife. And in a sense, he's saying, you know, you listened to her instead of me. And that's what I wanted. I wanted my husband to listen to me instead of God, which when you put it in that context, that is something to really be fearful of. We don't want to be wives who are insisting that our husbands listen to us instead of God. And so the Lord was just showing me those things. And, you know, we finally did reconcile. And my husband said, just very quietly, he said, you know, honey, would you be okay with us looking for a house that would meet the qualifications that you have with the money we've saved, and consider moving instead of building? Because I think this is just going to continue to create stress in our lives. And so for me, that was surrender. That was letting my husband lead. And so when we talk about, you know, recognizing the problem and moving in a different direction, I think it's a series of little decisions. Like, first of all, it was the big decision of letting go of this dream of an addition. But then it was all the little decisions that followed that. Every time that addition or that image I had in my mind of how it would look, every time that came into my mind, it was another opportunity to surrender and say, no, I want my husband to lead. And every process of looking online for houses and visiting them, it was a process, or it was an opportunity to invite my husband to be the leader of our home and invite God to be in control of our family. And so little by little by little, every time that we surrender on something that we would really like it another way in our marriage, and yet our husband is leading in a way that we wouldn't first choose. Those decisions of surrendering and submitting in marriage, that's what changes us, right? If we just set off on our course of wanting control and taking control and having control in the ways that we want, we will just become more controlling. But change happens internally when we choose little by little by little to surrender and to put control back in God's hands. That's really the life of faith, isn't it? You know, this podcast is all about taking leaps of faith. And faith is adopting God's perspective rather than my perspective, saying he knows better than I do how this is all, what will be the best for our family and how it's all going to go and what will be good in hindsight. He has a better perspective than I do.
Mm-hmm. And that's so good. And I think that is so true, is that I think we can get a lot of times on big things that God asks us to do. And I think absolutely, and you talk about it in that, control can keep you from doing the things that God wants you to do. But I just think some of these small everyday decisions that we're making of obedience and deferring to not just our husband, God, and what he wants in his ways, in all sorts of things, that really is what makes a life of faith.
Absolutely.
So I do want to talk about, we've kind of talked about parenting, we've talked control from our marriage, and that's really us trying to control other people. But I love the section that you're talking about, that sometimes how we allow other people to control us can show who we give priority to in our lives. So I think even some of these big decisions, we can let other people in, other people's wishes, other people's desires, and even override maybe what God wants us to do. I mean, I think a lot of the stories that you tell a lot have to do with women and mother-in-laws. Seems, other women with control issues. So talk about how that can impact people controlling us, how that has to do with, kind of trusting God and control, letting God have control.
Yes, absolutely. We haven't mentioned yet that my book, Control Girl, is the study of 7 different controlling women in the Bible. And one of those women is Leah. And, you don't think of her as overtly controlling, but so many women who maybe struggle more with anxiety and fear have found help from Leah's story in particular, because Leah, she was the ugly sister. She was the daughter that was unwanted. She was the one who felt invisible. And Leah was trying to find her worth in her husband's eyes. And so we see her repeatedly bringing a baby after baby after baby before her husband, saying, now am I good enough? Now, now do you see me? Now am I worth something? And you can see those questions reflected in the names that she gives these different babies. And it's never enough. Her husband, he's always got eyes for Rachel. And so in a sense, like you mentioned, Amy, she's giving control to her husband. He's letting him decide if she's worth anything. And isn't that what we do when we put so much emphasis on what a particular person thinks of us or a particular group of people? We let them control us. We're slaves to them. We spend our lives like trying to gain their attention or their worth or find our satisfaction in what they think of us. And nobody deserves to be in that place other than God, our creator. He is the one who assigns our worth and our value. And with our lives, we come before him, bringing our sacrifices. And he alone is worthy of our sacrifices. And so surrendering control to God sometimes is saying, I won't be controlled anymore by this person and what they think of me. Does that kind of make sense?
It does. Because just me, I think about this in a couple of ways. Number one, I think about me that I've struggled with people pleasing, just not stepping out because I'm afraid of what people would think of me.
Right.
or just being scared. I think that maybe the anxiety and fear comes back. It's like, oh, I don't know what they're going to think of me. And so you let those opinions be higher. Their opinion is higher where God is telling you to do something.
Yes.
But you let them control
Yes,
you.
absolutely. There's an illustration in the book where a woman had a very, very controlling mom. And she just had spent her whole life trying to please her mom and actually had paid for her mother's mortgage for many, many years. But she was facing financial difficulty and was not going to be able to pay for this mortgage any longer. And she dreaded telling her mother this. It was just this awful experience. Her mother was angry. She felt entitled that what kind of daughter are you that you wouldn't pay for my mortgage? You're kicking me out of my own home. And so the grief that this daughter had to go through of separating herself from her mother. There was a period where they didn't even speak to each other. But she looks back at that as a time of healing, of breaking that control, that unhealthy control that mother had over her daughter. And she said after she went through that struggle of breaking free from her mother's controlling reign over her life, she felt more freedom to give God control. She said, for the first time in a very long time, I could genuinely pray for my mother and pray that God would bless her. I was always so resentful of her before, but there's this new freedom of putting her mom back in God's hands and saying, you are the one that I'm aiming to please with my life. And so there's freedom. And so, whether it's a mom or a mother-in-law or a controlling boss in our life, I think just that process of giving God control is so valuable. But I would like to mention that as controlling women, we're often most aware of the other controlling woman. I don't know if you've ever experienced that, Amy, because I don't know how much you struggle with control. But if I'm in a room and there's someone trying to take control, I'm so irritated by her. And so often when our mother-in-laws or our moms or whoever they're imposing their viewpoint on our lives, they're trying to control. Well, I'm so irritated by that because I want control. I want control of my own life. But I think that for both of us, for both this other controlling woman and for myself, the most important thing that God wants is for him to be in control. And so rather than trying to control her and get back control of myself, I think God wants me to deal with my own heart. What she needs and what I need is God. And God alone can soften our hearts to the sin of control and can woo us with his grace and his compassion and peace. And God is the only one. Like, we cannot turn another control girl into a Jesus girl. That's God's work. And we can't turn our own hearts from control girls into Jesus girls. That's God's work. But as every person turns to God and makes them their God and surrenders, that's how we become like Jesus, who said, not my will, but yours be done.
That's so good. And I think we're going to stop right there because, that's really what it goes down to is really doing God's way. Because in the little moments and in the big, it's all about this life of obedience, and it all adds up to a life of faith that's pleasing to God and doing his will. So I think that's perfect.
So Shannon, if people want to connect with you and pick up the book, where can they do that at?
Sure. Controlgirl.com is the website that you can find lots of extra free resources, like a discussion guide for group leaders and different downloadable helps and tips for using the book. But the book is available at your Christian bookstore or online at Amazon, all the different various outlets.
All right, Shannon. Well, thanks so much for being with me again today. Well, guys, I hope you enjoyed that conversation with Shannon. This topic of control was just so eye-opening to me as a root cause of some of my struggles. And I have a sneaky suspicion that maybe this could be an issue for you too. Perhaps it's showing up in small ways in your parenting or in your marriage. maybe in anger or anxiety, or maybe this could be shedding some light on why you're having a hard time saying yes to something big God is calling you to. Maybe you're just holding too tight to the reins of wanting to control every aspect of what's going to happen instead of letting go and letting God guide you as you go. It's definitely something I have struggled with, and it's okay if you are struggling too. I think we can all learn to let go a little more and surrender our wills to Him so we can live faithful lives that are pleasing to Him. All right, let me pray for us as we close out. Lord, thank you so much for this time that we have had with Shannon. Thank you for teaching her about surrender and opening her eyes to the issue of control. I just thank you for this time of learning. I just thank you for open eyes and soft hearts to receive this message. And I just pray that you would help us to surrender in these places that we are struggling, because we trust you. We trust you to lead and guide us as we let go of the reins and let you control our lives. In Jesus' name, amen. All right, guys, just a reminder to check out our show notes over at abidingministries.net. You can also connect with us on social media as Abiding Ministries on both Facebook and Instagram. And listen, if you haven't left a review on iTunes, I'd love for you guys to take a few minutes to do just that this week, just to help everybody else know what the show is like. All right, guys, thank you so much for listening, and we will see you next week on Feathers.